you people. Starship Rowan Roper up for another day of broadcast insolence. Lauren Cohen in for Richard Roper today.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. Well, woo! Some things happened. Good golly. It's just not easy being a congressman anymore. It's just being an incumbent, just not so easy. Being a Republican incumbent, especially. Democratic incumbents, maybe Democrats. It's easier, but not so good. Eric Cantor, the House Majority Leader, not the Speaker, but the number 2 guy in the House, loses his election last night, his primary election. He spent, and I crap you not, he spent more money taking people to steakhouses in this last election quarter than his opponent, Dave Brat.
Who?
Exactly. Spent on his entire campaign. And yet he loses. How does that happen? Ed Henry is standing by on the Super Celebrity Hotline. Well, Ed, how the hell did this happen?
I mean, you couldn't spend $200,000 on brats in Chicago, could you? I mean, they're good,
I could.
Yeah, I mean, the steakhouse thing, I think if that's not a symbol of Eric Cantor, Republican, Democrat, no matter what your party, if you've been in Washington so long and you're in the leadership, you don't go back home to your district, in this case, Richmond, Virginia, and talk to the people. You lose sight of what your focus is, frankly. You lose sight of what issues matter to them. Immigration reform is clearly one that his opponent, Mr. Bratt, played masterfully, trying to paint Eric Cantor as somebody who's in favor of amnesty. And look, if you were to look at Eric Cantor's voting record over the last decade or so, he is a conservative, period. But he was painted as a moderate, as someone who was selling out. And I think it's not just ideology. It's sort of this crony capitalism thing you've heard from the Tea Party and others on the right who feel like it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, if you're in the leadership, you're John Boehner, you're Eric Cantor, you're part of them, and you're not really listening to the people. And I think Eric Cantor learned a big lesson last night.
All right. Here is Dave Brett on your air, actually, from last night.
It wasn't a contest between the Tea Party and the Republicans and all this, although I had tremendous Tea Party support and just wonderful people in the Tea Party and grassroots helping me out, and they're clearly responsible for the win. But I ran on the Republican principles.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what he's saying. I mean, I think that there's no doubt, though, that he'd have to admit that the Tea Party is what gave him the fuel. It was the ignition to take on Cantor and actually not just take him on, but beat him. Yeah, he stood up mostly on what he'd call Republican principles. And again, I think that beyond immigration and a couple other things, you couldn't find very many issues where Bratt is different from Cantor, but Cantor was just outboxed.
How much of this, though, was Laura Ingraham and talk radio playing a part
of this?
I
think talk radio played a huge role. I mean, as Laura Ingraham and Mark Levin and others, and there have been people saying that the Tea Party's influence was waning, that talk radio's influence was waning, and that, it's all about big money and the Koch brothers. Wait a second, this guy spent $200,000. Cantor spent over $5 million. So, and had all the name ID in the world. I mean, in a way, regardless of what your party or your position on any of this is, there's something refreshing about an outsider just being able to beat a Washington insider. And I think that's the bigger message. People are going to overread this about the Tea Party's influence. They're going to overread it about what it means for the future of the Republican Party. Yes, those are legitimate questions. The bigger question is what this means for Washington incumbents, Democrat, Republican. I think people are not paying attention to something that happened in Nevada last night. The Virginia thing's big. But in Nevada, in the governor's race, the Republican governor won his primary, and he's going to run again. But in the Democratic primary, basically none of the above won. It beat, all the human beings who were running, because in the state law in Nevada, you could have none of the above is on the ballot. And so if that's not a message, when you put that together with Eric Cantor, again, in a Democratic primary and a Republican primary, that people are fed up, they're PO'd, whatever you want to say, and they've had enough.
Well, okay. Let's take a look at something here, though. There's 8.186 million people in the state of Virginia. Let's just assume that half of those people are eligible to vote. It's more, but half of those people are eligible to vote and are capable of voting and going. So let's call it 4 million people. Right. And I know that's low, but just for the sake of the argument, I want to keep the math easy here. Dave Bratt got 36,000 votes. Yeah. 36,000 votes out of a potential 2 million, let's call it.
Yeah, maybe a little less in. Well, you're talking about the whole state. Remember,
Right.
This is just one district in Virginia.
Right. But
So
I'm just saying that it's you in a state, in a very important state.
Purple state that goes back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. It's a battleground in the presidential elections. The gubernatorial and Senate races are close. Yeah, more people should turn out. You know what's even more discouraging is that most people thought, oh, Cantor lost because there was very low turnout, and so that helps the challenger. Yeah, low turnout, but actually, my understanding is more people turned out this time than they did for the primary 2 years ago because it wasn't so contested because Cantor wasn't really on the ropes. And so, yes, the numbers were really low. It's embarrassing. But you know what? It was actually better than the previous election cycle. That tells you that beyond the anger in Washington, there's a little too much apathy out there. And people need to, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, get out and vote. Make your voice heard.
7,000 votes made the difference. So
Yeah,
to Lauren's point about radio, about marketing, about all of that, 7,000 votes make the difference in a primary where about, let's say the turnout based on the numbers, only at least on the Republican side.
60,000 or so.
Yeah, 60,000 for the.
Well, that's why talk radio, to your point, that's why talk radio mattered. If it's the race, it's so, few people turning out and the decision is, a 7,000 vote margin, who Laura Ingraham or some other talk radio host who's in that market, endorses is going to have a big outsized role.
All right. So now what happens? What happens in the general for this guy?
Well, I mean, first of all, in Washington, Cantor's now announcing officially, I guess, at about 4:30 Eastern time, 3:30 your time, that he's stepping down as majority leader at the end of July. He'll stay in his seat till the end of the year. So there'll be a big leadership battle. We can talk about that on another day. Back in his seat, there's a Democrat who's running who nobody really gave a chance to. And it's mostly a Republican seat. But, look, now that Cantor's been knocked off, can this Tea Party candidate, Brad, can he keep the momentum going in the general, or do the Democrats get their act together, pour a bunch of money in there, and take a seat away? Maybe. My guess is based on gerrymandering and the way a lot of these districts are. This district, ironically, was, engineered by Eric Cantor and other Republican leaders to be more Republican than it was in recent years, and he ends up losing in a Republican primary.
Right. And so it's about 5% of a little bit more than 5% of the constituents in that district voted for Eric Bratt, and obviously he had
Dave Bratt, Eric. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Eric Bratt, Dave Bratt. I got all confused. It just tells you exactly how dangerous a circumstance. To your point, Ed, how dangerous the circumstances for these guys is.
Yes, because I think it's a message well beyond the Tea Party, well beyond Eric Cantor and the Republican leadership. Yes, there's going to be a reckoning within the Republican Party. We're seeing that playing out now with this majority leader race to come, but if you're a Democrat this morning and you've been in Congress for 15, 20, 25 years and you're celebrating Eric Cantor's demise, you better get your butt in gear and start getting out there and campaigning, whether you're in Virginia, Nevada, or Illinois, because I think the voters are coming for the incumbents in both parties.
How does this affect the Obama administration, especially when it comes to the issues it's trying to maneuver forward, like immigration?
Good question. I think it's a loss for the president in the short term because I think, there's a limited number of legacy items that even though this was a Republican loss, he needed Eric Cantor, who was standing up for the president, which is one of the reasons why Eric Cantor lost. On immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform, what do you want to call it? Critics call it amnesty. And so the president, short term, has yet another legacy item that's sort of being taken off the table. It's one less thing he's likely to get as he becomes a lame duck. But I do think, in fairness, it has to be pointed out, in the long term, this could be a much bigger loss for Republicans because I don't care where you are on the issue. I have a lot of people tweeting me, well, forget it, comprehensive immigration reform, secure the borders. Yeah, secure the borders. Absolutely. Whether you're a Democrat, do that. People should follow the law. But if anybody out there in either party thinks, or any party thinks, that the current immigration system works, take a look at what's going on with these kids of undocumented immigrants who are just showing up at the border down in Texas and Arizona, are being shipped off to these sites without their parents and are living potentially in inhumane conditions, are being bussed around. Take a look at some of the news reports in Texas and Arizona. The system is messed up big time. It needs to be fixed. And if you look at the demographics of the country in terms of the Hispanic population and whatnot, look what happened to Mitt Romney in 2012 and in the Hispanic vote against President Obama. If Republicans don't work this out among themselves, sure, President Obama takes it on the chin right now in terms of a legacy item, but come 2016, how are the Republicans going to get any Hispanic votes?
All right. Thank you very much. Ed Henry, Fox News. Appreciate it. All right. We'll talk to Ed soon. Coming up, a response from the former chairman of the Republican Party. What does he think about this?